Did you know there's a way to seed your microgreen trays up to 4 times faster? With the world's fastest handheld microgreen seeder, the Little Green Seeding Machine, you can seed up to 300 trays per hour thanks to our unique quick seed technology. That's 4 times the speed of hand seeding, giving you back precious time to focus on growing your business or spending time with family and friends. But it's not just speed. The Little Green Seeding Machine seeds more evenly and accurately, reducing the risk of disease and boosting your crop yields. You'll grow healthier microgreens with less effort. It works with nearly every microgreen variety. Plus, it's designed by farmers for farmers, with an ergonomic design that's easy on your body, so you can say goodbye to those long hours of hand seeding. Want to know how much time and money you can save? Click the link below and find out today. It's time to grow smarter.
Welcome to the Microgreens Mastery Podcast. I'm your host, Jonah Krochmalnek. Together, we'll explore the art of turning tiny seeds into a thriving microgreens empire, sharing insights, coveted secrets, and strategic wisdom from building one of Canada's largest microgreens farms. Stay tuned for thought-provoking conversations with leading figures in the world of microgreens. Welcome to the podcast, everyone. My name is Jonah, and I founded one of Canada's largest microgreens farms, growing over 250,000 microgreens trays in my farming career. And I'm on a mission to help growers and farmers grow more food with less resources and make their farms lean profit machines. On today's AMA, we're going to touch on the best ways to calculate your profit margins for each crop by clamshell and by tray, how to best use leftover microgreens for your production, using computer fans versus oscillating fans for your farm, and so much more. There's a ton of great info in this episode, so let's get right into it. So the first question is, since you've been visiting farms around the world, has your opinion changed on growing methods, including seed density and the super soil recipe you recommend? So in terms of soil, I still haven't found a soil recipe that works better than the super soil recipe. Now, of course, in traveling around the world, ProMix, HP, and Gaia Green fertilizer are not available everywhere. So, when I was in Japan or in Mexico, these things weren't available, or like Nepal. It's really a more US, Canada. Some places in Mexico you can get it, but generally speaking, it's a product that's available in North America and really the US and Canada. So when you're in other parts of the world, I recommend something similar. If you can get the Gaia Green fertilizer, that's definitely what I'd recommend. But if not, then you either have to kind of replicate it as best you can yourself, or find something similar that's available pre-made locally. Now, peat moss varies greatly in terms of the quality, so you really have to test the peat moss and see which one or what's available works best. And then in some places, you can't even get peat moss. It's really very difficult to get. So a lot of people use coconut coir, and that's a whole different growing methodology because it holds so much more water and dries out much slower, which increases the risk of disease like Pythium. So there's different requirements for a soil like that. So if you can, I definitely recommend replicating the super soil recipe with ProMix and Gaia Green, or as close as you can to something like that. In terms of seeding density, it's something that's very highly correlated with quality. So I generally recommend lower seeding densities than like the average microgreens grower, because I like to focus on quality, because that's what's going to differentiate your product from everyone else that's growing. So if everyone else is seeding for maximizing yield and seeding, for example, broccoli between like 20 and 30 grams, sometimes even more, then the higher your seed density, generally speaking, the lower the quality of the product is, because each plant is getting less soil nutrition, is getting less light, so it just can't grow to its full genetic potential. So that really hasn't changed. I think I'm more open to a middle ground, whereas if I recommend 10 grams of broccoli and most people do 20, even just moving from 20 to 15 will increase the quality of the product pretty substantially, because you're going to have, like I said, more light available and more soil nutrition available for each individual plant, meaning that it's going to be more nutrient dense on a gram per gram basis, and it's going to have a better shelf life, and it's going to look a lot better for specific customer types like restaurants that are very particular with the quality of the soil. So overall, not a lot has changed on those two, but certain other things have changed. Like I found, new machinery, new software, just recommendations for other things that have changed as I've seen more and more farms. So I personally learned way more in the last year of doing the podcast and visiting farms than growing my farm, because when you do it for 10 years, you kind of reach a plateau of knowledge, and then it's very incremental what you learn. So being able to visit all these farms that are doing things differently, have different resource limitations, has been really helpful to understand what the optimal strategy is depending on what you have available in your local market. Next question is, at what point should I begin focusing more on restaurants? So this is going to depend on the strategy you want for your business. So if you're at a point where you're just starting out and you're doing direct to consumer, ideally you want to move away. I don't want to say move away from that, but move more towards restaurants and grocery stores and eventually to distributors. Like that's the trajectory I find works best, because direct to consumer is great to start, but if you have 200, 300, 400 customers that you're delivering to, it becomes very difficult logistically to make that work. So as you start getting customers that purchase more and more product, but have slightly lower margins as you move up that customer ladder, restaurants would be the next best one, because the volume is higher than individual customers. The price is often a little bit lower, but not much lower. So I would say once you're comfortable growing product, and the growing recipes and the crop cycle, and you feel like you've had a consistent grow for a few months, that's when I would start focusing more on restaurants. Now, the part that can get people stuck is, there's a trade-off in that, if you're growing broccoli and pea shoots and sunflower shoots, restaurants generally are not going to buy those products as much as they would basil, cilantro, amaranth, mustards, those type of products. And generally, most of those have a 2-week crop cycle. So you need more space to get the same amount of production. Now, generally, those products sell for more, but they generally don't make up for, you don't make double on a 2-week crop cycle crop than you would on a 1-week crop cycle crop. So you're getting, not half the revenue, but less than equal to the direct to consumer. So there's a trade-off there that sometimes makes it make more sense to wait a little bit longer, get some more direct to consumer restaurants, save up some more money, and then slowly transition or add in restaurants. So it would be a process, not just like one day you just switch to restaurants, because I don't think that's going to be the best idea. And then eventually, as you sell to potentially grocery stores, then you can start letting the customers know that you sell direct to consumer customers, let them know that they can buy the product at grocery stores as well. And some of them will naturally switch to that model, and you'll kind of slowly transition to restaurants and grocery stores, and then hopefully distributors to get, volume a lot higher as you scale up the business. What size container should I be using when servicing restaurants? So this is a good question. It's really going to depend on your local market. So rather than suggesting what my local market has, it's really important that you do the research and find out what is the standard clamshell size and product weight in your local market. So in my local market, it's 100 grams. So most restaurants buy clamshells that are 100 grams. Certain places in the US, it might be 4 ounces. So a standard clamshell would be 4 ounces. That's what everything's priced at. I'd highly recommend not making your own unit size. So if everything's 4 ounces in your local area that distributors and local growers sell to restaurants, you don't want to start doing 3 ounces or 5 ounces, because it's going to be a lot more confusing for customers, like restaurants and chefs, to actually make an apples to apples comparison. So you want to make it as easy as possible for the restaurant to have a fair comparison. So if you have a 4 ounce and the other growers or distributors have 4 ounce, it's very easy to be like, okay, this price is equal or maybe a little bit less. I'm gonna test out using this product. Or if it's the same price and one of them is higher quality, it makes it just an easier decision for the restaurant. Chefs are really busy. So the easier you make it for them to purchase, the more likely they are going to purchase. So That's one simple tip that's super easy to do. And the best way to find out that is either when you go and do sales calls, just ask questions rather than trying to sell them, and you can find that information out. Or you can contact distributors to get price lists to find out, what unit sizes and prices restaurants or distributors are selling microgreens to restaurants for. Next question: what's the best way to deal with having extra product at the end of the week? So from a pure business perspective, the best strategy would be to incorporate giving out sample product from this extra that you have throughout your delivery route. So what I would do every week is, let's say you have once a week delivery route, and you stop at like 10 locations, whether it's houses or restaurants, whatever. You want to incorporate new potential customers in that route, drop off samples with a brochure. Ideally, if you can talk to a chef or produce manager, depending on what type of customer you're trying to get, that would be the best way to do it. But if not, even just dropping off the sample and getting a contact is a really great way to incorporate something that's pretty low effort and low time commitment especially when you're busy, to just get more contacts in the industry and get some feedback on your product and potentially get a sale. So that's the best way from a business perspective. From a personal perspective, I generally recommend just like consuming a large amount of microgreens for yourself. I think it's a very highly nutritious product, and the more you consume it, generally speaking, all else equal, the healthier you'll be and the more energy you have to run the business. So definitely recommend, if you have a microgreens business, consume as much as you can. I find a balance act between those two of like making sure you have some for yourself to consume as much as possible, and then trying to give out samples of product to potential new customers as much as possible. And then you kind of get the health benefits for yourself and or your family. And then you're also actively, doing product development or, business development to ensure that you're going to get new customers over time with the least amount of possible time effort, because as a microgreens grower, you guys are busy. And if you're just starting out, you will eventually get busy, and doing these things in an efficient manner is really important. Next thing is, how many grams of vermiculite should you use per tray? So I don't know, by weight. What I generally would recommend is doing it based on seed size. So the bigger the seed, the more vermiculite you need to cover that seed. So the goal is to pretty much cover the seed in the least amount of vermiculite that you can, so that you barely see any seeds. So maybe there's a few seeds showing, that's fine, but you don't want like a lot of seeds showing. That is the optimal amount of vermiculite to use. Using more than that's not going to hurt. Up to a certain point, if you're like dousing the tray to the point where it's like sticking well above the tray itself, that's probably too much, because it's going to block the airflow to the seeds. But generally speaking, using the least amount to cover the seed so you barely see any seed is the best barometer of how much vermiculite to use. And that's going to, like I said, vary. So if you're trying to cover basil seed, you need much less than if you're trying to cover pea seed, because pea seeds are larger, therefore more seed or more vermiculite is going to fall in between the seed, and just you need more of it to be used. The easiest way, to be honest, to spread the vermiculite is with the Little Green Seeding Machine. So the Pro model comes with a vermiculite roller, and that will allow you to cover the seed without having to like measure out or weigh or measure out the volume of the vermiculite. You just roll it across the tray, and there's different wheel sizes which will determine how much vermiculite is dropped on the tray. So you can have a certain wheel size you use for your basil and broccoli and all the small seed varieties, and then there's another wheel you can use that'll add more vermiculite to trays like peas and sunflower and corn and wheatgrass and all the big seeds that you may be adding vermiculite to get the benefits that vermiculite offers. Which the more people I've actually talked to over the last year that have started to use vermiculite, the more I'm like extremely confident in the benefits of it. So I would say like 90 to 95% of the people I recommend it to like are so happy that they're using it, because it's just made their life so much easier in terms of like reducing disease, getting better germination, having to water less during the germination phase. It's just like a the best easy to implement thing for your farm to improve the crop quality. So if you haven't tried it yet, highly recommend getting some fine vermiculite. So not the chunky stuff, fine vermiculite, and adding it to some trays just to test out, see what happens, see if it improves your yields, see if it improves your germination and reduces disease risk. And I'm quite confident that you will be very happy with switching to that method of growing. Next question. As I've grown my microgreens farm, I've found my profits have shrunk. I'm selling more varieties to distributors like cilantro and basil. I would have thought it would be more profitable as I got bigger, but the opposite has happened. What should I do to be more profitable moving forward? So when you say profits have shrunk, I don't know if you mean margins have shrunk or actual like total profits of the business have shrunk, because those are two very different things. Like it's very normal for your profit margins to shrink as you sell to distributors, because the whole point is you're selling more volume. So while your profit margins have shrunk percentage wise, your actual total profit should increase. Now, if it's actual profits have shrunk, there's definitely something odd going on there. Potentially could be a yield issue with those crops you're growing, like cilantro and basil. Could be the pricing you're selling as maybe too low. So what I always recommend is doing like crunching the numbers, and the best way that I know to do it is the calculator that we created, so that it makes it super easy. You don't have to like figure out what to calculate, what to include, not include. Everything's figured out for you, and you can download that at microgreensconsulting.com. So you just put in like all the variable costs, all the costs for your product, and then it pumps out on the other side what the profit margin is, how much you're making per clamshell, per tray, and then if you're actually making money at different price points. So that'll be the easiest and fastest way to figure out what's going on there, because you should definitely be making more total profit as you scale up. But something like price, as an example, if you price your product too low and you don't know what your costs are, it's very, very easy to make a decision where you're actually losing money from that decision. So this is a business, right? Like you gotta understand the numbers. So it's really, really important to have an accurate picture of what the numbers look like. And what's nice, one nice thing about the cost calculators is you can save multiple versions of it. So you can have a version today with what your costs are now. You can have a version next year and compare the two and be like, oh, I'm actually losing, or I'm making 30 cents less per clamshell, after my cost increase over last year. And that can be a good guide to help you gauge on what you should adjust your pricing to. Because I think a lot of farms keep their prices the same for too long, and they're not recognizing that their costs have increased. Because totally understandable, if you're busy, you're like running your microgreens business, you're trying to grow the business. The last thing you're going to be doing is going on an Excel spreadsheet and trying to figure out how much money you're making per clamshell. Because if you see your bank accounts increasing, then you're like, okay, I'm making more money. But are you really optimizing that based on what your costs are and what your revenue is? So costs change over time, and you should adjust your price of your clamshells over time as well. So I generally recommend doing that every year, once a year, to adjust your prices. You could do it more often, but I think once a year is reasonable, especially now that inflation is more relatively reasonable compared to the last few years. So that's definitely the best way to figure out what's causing you to potentially have your profit shrink. And then you can make a decision of like, oh, my soil costs 3 times higher than it used to. Maybe that's something to consider, switching to another soil or finding a different supplier for that, as an example. So you can keep track of it over time, and those numbers are so valuable to determine what decisions to make for your business. So highly recommend downloading the cost calculators and using that as a way to track your numbers. Next question: is really hard to find ProMix products or any peat-based soils in my local area. I'm using coconut coir because it is the easiest available soil, but it is holding on to a lot of water. I don't need to water my crops for 5 to 6 days sometimes. Is this an issue for my crops? 5 to 6 days is a long time to not water your crops. I think most people have the opposite challenge, where they're watering every day or sometimes twice a day, which I think is overkill. You should be able to water every 1 to 3 days, depending on the crop. So like something like pea shoots is going to need more water. So at the beginning, maybe you can get away with every 2 to 3 days. And at the end, you might need to water every day if you're watering by hand. Obviously, I generally recommend watering with software and hardware, but it depends on the scale you're at. Now, if you're watering every 5 to 6 days, that's a sign that you're getting way too much water into the soil. Now, obviously, coconut coir holds more water. So if you add more water, it's going to absorb more than peat moss would. So what you kind of need to do is just reduce the amount of water to the point where every roughly 2 to 3 days, the soil dries out. So that means if you're adding, let's say, a liter of water at the beginning of when you first start bottom watering your crops, you probably want to try reducing it to 750 mil or 500 mil and just see if it takes 2 or 3 days till you need to water again. Then you figure out how much water you need for that crop. So that's the best way to figure that out, because pretty much if you're watering only every 5 to 6 days, that means your soil is probably pretty saturated. And if your soil is saturated for that long, you're much more likely to get mold issues, get disease, and most importantly, your crop's going to grow slower. Because if you're creating an anaerobic environment, the plants have less oxygen to uptake through the soil, or less air, I should say uptake, but less air room for the roots to grow, and they're more likely to start like rotting and getting disease issues. So plants don't absorb oxygen, but they need a lot of air space or oxygen-rich space in the soil so that it keeps an aerobic environment, meaning an oxygen-rich environment in the soil, rather than an aerobic environment, meaning a lack of oxygen in the soil. Because there's a very different type of microbiome that develops in aerobic versus anaerobic conditions. And generally, you want to have an aerobic condition with lots of oxygen, because the right type of bacteria and fungus will grow in that soil and support the growth of your plants, rather than an anaerobic environment in your soil, which will kind of slow down the growth and make it more difficult for your plants to grow, which means they're going to grow slower. You're going to get lower yields. The quality is going to be lower. So yeah, it's really important to have a soil that dries out faster. And if you can't change your soil to a peat-based soil, then the best way to do that is to water less total volume of water in each watering cycle, to get it down to about 2 to 3 days in between each watering. And that will make a big difference in your crop yields and crop quality. My crops are very wet when I harvest them. I have a small computer-style fans blowing on the crops, but it doesn't seem to be helping. How can I get my crops dry for when I harvest them? So yeah, generally speaking, I don't recommend those computer-style fans, because they kind of they're blowing too much air on the crop, and they're not always blowing it in the canopy where you want it. They're generally blowing it above the canopy. So it's moving the air above the crop, but not in the crop itself. So the best way to dry out the crop before you harvest them is using 16-inch wall. I generally recommend wall mounted. It doesn't have to be wall mounted, but wall mounted or floor style kind of fans that oscillate. So they're not directly blowing on one spot of your growing area at once. It's kind of moving the air around it. Now, this will only work to a certain extent if you're trying to grow like broccoli at really high seed densities. You need more and more powerful fans to get in the canopy. And then you start looking and getting like industrial style fans instead of just like relatively cheap fans that you can buy anywhere. So there's a combination of using those oscillating style fans the day or two before harvest to dry out the canopy and actually get the air in the canopy itself, not above the canopy, which is what the computer style fans generally do. And then the second thing is, if your seed density is too high, you may need to lower it. So I would first start out with trying to dry out the crops with the oscillating fans, see if that works. It'll definitely help 100%, but it may still have spots in the center that are still too wet. So if that's the case, you may need to lower seed density. Or if you really want to keep your seed density, you can look at getting more industrial strength fans that have maybe metal blades that will push air stronger than the plastic blades, but those fans are generally a lot more expensive. So balancing act there between the two, but that's definitely the best way to get your crops dry. And what's also important is, if you're using the quick cut greens harvester, which is one of the things I definitely recommend farms get. If the crop is wet, it's just not going to harvest it well. So it's really important that the crop is dry if you want to automate that process. which gets us into the next question is, at what point does it make sense to start automating parts of your process, and what areas should you focus on first? So to answer the first part, the best way to look at it is the payback period of automating that process. So that's like, just pure numbers. There's a lot of other side benefits, like consistency, easier to train staff, besides just the labor savings, higher quality of the product when you are using automation. But having said that, the easiest way to quantify it in a numbers perspective is what's the payback period based on your current size of operation, and then what's the payback period of what you expect to be in a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now. So if you're growing, let's say 100 trays, a week right now, and you're considering getting the quick cut greens harvester or the little green seeding machine or a soil machine, you want to figure out how much time is that machine going to save you each week. And then it's a pretty simple calculation of like, okay, the machine costs X amount. This is how much my labor costs. So, and that's a very simple calculation to figure out how long does it take for this piece of automation equipment to pay for itself. Now, when you look at things like soil mixing machines, those things are more expensive, so they generally take longer and make more sense to purchase at a larger scale. And hopefully that'll change over time as there's more low-cost solutions for microgreens farmers. But a lot of these pieces of equipment are really meant for large-scale greenhouses, so it gets at a small scale prohibitively expensive to purchase that type of equipment. Whereas things like the quick cut greens harvester, little green seeding machine, the bootstrap tray washer, those things are relatively low cost, so they pay for themselves very fast. So those are generally the ones I recommend to do first, because they're going to have the fastest return on investment. And also, those are things that are high, like you spend a lot of time in the process of harvesting trays, of seeding trays, of washing trays, of filling flats as well with soil. These are things that, most of the labor goes into those sort of tasks. Watering as well, potentially. So automating that. Generally, that's depending on your scale. Again, that's one that, depending on your scale, can be more in a middle category between the low-cost machines like the little green seeding machine and soil mixing machines. I'd say it's in between. But the point you start automating is when that payback period is less than a year. So if you're growing 100 trays and you're going to get a return on investment of like half a year on the little green seeding machine or the quick cut greens harvester, then it's, in my opinion, it's a no-brainer. You should be purchasing that because it's going to pay for itself very fast. And if it's half a year, it's 6 months. So after 6 months, you're making money on that purchase. And forever after, you are making money on that purchase. So it's a very easy decision to make. Whereas if a soil mixing machine is going to take, let's say hypothetically it takes 3 years to pay for itself, then that's a decision where it's like, okay, you got to start looking at like, where are you planning to grow in the next 3 years? So if you're planning to be steady state at 100, 200 trays, then that's a different decision process than if you're planning to double production. Because then all of a sudden, if you're doubling production and growing 300 trays instead of, let's say, 150, then you're getting to a year and a half period where it's like, that's pretty close. And especially if you're trying to continue growing the business after that, it may just make sense to purchase that sooner rather than later. So it really depends on where you're at now, what your growth trajectory is, and then kind of make a decision from there. But that's the logical way to do it. And then on top of that, of course, there's the benefits of having potentially higher yields, having a higher quality product. So if you're trying to train someone on how to harvest basil microgreens, and you're selling to chefs that require a very consistent stem length because they want a consistent product, it's a lot harder to train someone to do that than it is to be like, hey, push this product through this machine at this height. It's measurable. It's a lot easier to do. Or same thing with the low green seeding machine. If you're like, hey, I want exactly 5 grams of basil seed on these trays, and I want them evenly spread so there's the least amount of disease risk. And so each microgreen is a similar size, because if there's clumps of seeds, those are going to be smaller because they have less room to grow. And then areas where there's less seed is going to be bigger seeds. So you get uneven growth of trays. So something like the little green seeding machine would solve that problem. And then it's a lot easier to train staff. So you get higher yields, less disease risk, and easier to train staff. And then with the harvester, you get the same stem length. It's a lot faster to harvest, and it's a lot easier for staff to do it as well. So lots of benefits to these low-cost automation besides just labor, but easiest way to quantify it is with labor. So I hope you guys enjoyed this Q&A episode. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks for tuning in to the Microgreens Mastery Podcast. To access a wealth of insights, just click the subscribe button, stay notified about each new episode, and enjoy all of this wisdom for free. If you're ready to supercharge your microgreens business, visit microgreensconsulting.com for a gold mine of guides and resources. We've transformed thousands of microgreens businesses, and you're invited to join the success story. Let's stay connected. Follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok at Microgreens Consulting for exclusive content and expert tips and wisdom. If you found this episode insightful, please leave us a review, spread the word, and let's share microgreens magic with the world. Until next time, let curiosity fuel your growth, and may happiness be your harvest. Happy growing, everyone.